Hello, Sooner Nation, OU Insider subscribers, Coach Brian Clinton enthusiasts, people who OU fans, after several days and days and days of everything seeming bleak, now maybe have some optimism that this program knows what it's doing to some extent. This is probably the podcast for you. This is another episode of the Oklahoma Drill, a podcast fueled by OUinsider.com and the Rivals Network. I am joined, as always, because we again went another week without him entering the transfer portal, looking for another podcast. Sir Coach Brian Clinton. Brian, should we start calling Oklahoma the Oklahoma Cougars? The Oklahoma State Cougars? Because half the team is Washington State now.
Yeah.
What do you think? What do you think of that idea?
Something like that.
What do you think about Cougars as a mascot?
The Wazoo Sooners. Yeah, Cougars would be. I'm not too. That's not as shabby. That's not too shabby. I like that.
I like Wazoo Sooners better, actually. Now that I say that, because Oklahoma Cougars sounds.
It doesn't. Yeah.
It doesn't sound immediately like we're talking about a football team.
It sounds like something that might pop up on the old, if you don't have ad blockers up on Google Chrome. So.
Oh, man. Of course, we are talking about this because Brian, a little more than 12 hours ago, former Washington State quarterback John Mateer has announced that he is committed to the Sooners. It brings about not only weeks of speculation about his future, but his commitment comes just a couple of days after he entered the transfer portal. And Brian, we're going to dig into every facet of this. We're going to talk about some of the other portal additions that have already committed to Oklahoma and a couple that are likely incoming. But Brian, John Mateer is the story. I mean, he has been the focus of Oklahoma's plans for quite some time now. He was at the top of their list of offseason priorities. He's the number one overall player, the number one quarterback in the transfer portal. He's the prize. He's the guy. Oklahoma got their guy. And now all of a sudden, we're going to break this down a little bit more, but now all of a sudden Oklahoma heads into next season with an identity. You've got Ben Arbuckle as your offensive coordinator, also obviously from Washington State. You've got John Mateer likely as your starting quarterback, and now you've got a centerpiece. Oklahoma's got a centerpiece. Yep. They've got an identity for this offense. But we've been bracing for this, obviously, for some time now. But now that the announcement is official, what's your reaction? What are your initial thoughts on John Mateer coming to Norman, Oklahoma?
It really can't be overstated, like how big a deal it is for Oklahoma's program, given the way that the offense performed in 2024, the amount of players that hit the transfer portal, which isn't uncommon now. Like it's not uncommon to see 20 plus players enter the portal at any given school, but given all of that. Almost this reputation, I guess, that Oklahoma's built for itself now, which is just you'll get absolute whiplash as an Oklahoma fan, because for the longest time it was all offense, no defense. Now it's flipped on its head. You have a championship caliber defense, but you can't score any points. Mateer changes all of that. And I don't want it to sound like a lazy take, because it is something that I see quite a bit of. The comparisons to Baker Mayfield are there, obviously. They have a similar mentality, playing mentality. You can see flashes of it just in the way that they run the football, the off-platform throws, the navigating the pocket. Like, there are similarities there. But I think really why Oklahoma fans, it's so easy for them to make that comparison is because this is this is similar to what situation Oklahoma's offense was in, not to the extent that it is now, but when Baker Mayfield stepped in and became the starter under Lincoln Riley, you were transitioning over from Trevor Knight and everything that happened in the back end of Josh Heupel's time at Oklahoma, and so Baker Mayfield kind of became that, not just the gunslinger, but like the guy that everybody rallied around. And Mateer has that same kind of feel. And so I think that when you look at this guy, and I'm sure we'll break it down from all angles, um, when you look at the weight of a commitment like this, it's massive. It is unlike anybody that Oklahoma has landed in the transfer portal to this point, outside of maybe Dylan Gabriel. And I would say that it might have a greater significance even than that, considering the situation. So just massive.
No, it is. It makes me think Dylan Gabriel and Kyler Murray as guys
Yeah.
you land in the portal that I think the potential is there to completely change your offense fundamentally. And this is kind of similar in this. I mean, think about it. You got it's a little different, obviously, but you got Jeff Lebby and Dylan Gabriel that came to Norman together 2 years ago, guys with
Yeah.
experience playing together, and then that's the direction you're off. That it represents a fundamental shift in the
Hmm.
direction of the offense. Brian, I was going through. I published a story earlier today, just breaking down some of the numbers. I know you have a video forthcoming about him as well, breaking down his film. The one thing now, most people by now, most OU fans know his stats: almost 4,000 total yards this past year, 44 total touchdowns. Led the team in rushing attempts, rushing yards, rushing touchdowns. He was one of the most efficient passers in college football this season. Quite honestly, Brian, if he played at a bigger program than Washington State, he would have gotten even more buzz than you did.
Yeah.
That's when you look at the stats, he performed like a top 10 quarterback this year in terms
Right.
of efficiency, explosiveness. The one thing that stands out to me going through his numbers, and it is kind of similar to the Baker Mayfield aspect of it. I didn't know this. He averaged 4.7 yards after contact this year. 4.7.
Yeah.
First among all FBS quarterbacks with at least 60 rushing attempts. And you know what he averaged on it? You know what his yards per carry was on the year? Just in total?
Hmm.
4.6. Yet yards per carry or yards after contact, 4.7. And I've started going through his watching games, watching clips. And especially when you look at the way Arbuckle called offense his first year at Washington State and then the year before at Western Kentucky, he completely revamped that offense around John Mateer's rushing ability.
Yeah.
He averaged 10 yards per carry between the tackles. Mateer did this year. Like it's scrambling, getting out of sure sacks. It's hard nosed runs up the middle. You have to start thinking about what this offense can be with John Mateer at the head, like all the
Yeah.
options that it gives you.
Yeah.
I don't know. I know you did that film breakdown when you're watching his film. What stands out to you?
So, and maybe I spoke too quickly about the transfer portal thing being the biggest get. He does, a guy that he reminds me of that Oklahoma did get in the transfer portal, just from a running perspective, is Jalen Hurts. Like
Mm-hmm.
very similar. I would say, obviously, you know, Jalen Hurts to this point in his, you had a senior in Jalen Hurts, right? Coming in to Oklahoma, he had a physical specimen, just absolutely a guy that you did not want to meet in the A gap if you were a linebacker. That's just somebody. It was going to be a tough day. Mateer plays with similar physicality. He's not as well built out yet to this point, but by no means is he a small quarterback. Um, I think the best way to maybe compare him would be he throws. I don't know that he has as much arm talent as a guy like Baker Mayfield. Um, it's there. It's off platform. It looks a little bit different, but he is definitely he's a better runner. He's more of a threat as a runner than Baker was. So that's a probably the best way to explain that portion of his game. Now, and maybe it's just because I got so used to watching Oklahoma quarterbacks in 2024. Uh, but when I watch the film, the first thing that really jumps off tape for me, even early in the season, whenever he was a brand new starter, Jesse, he does a really fantastic job of keeping his eyes down the field consistently the whole time.
Mhm.
He's able to navigate the pocket. He manipulates the pocket really well. It's natural to him. You can see it in his game, but he manipulates the pocket really well. Keeps his eyes downfield, which is a quality that, unfortunately, the fact of the matter is, you didn't have that with Jackson Arnold this year. His eyes got down and saw the pressure a lot. Uh, Mateer is always looking for an opportunity to advance the ball down the field, and he's not just a scrambler. As you
Mhm.
said, man, whenever there's going to be designed quarterback run, and he runs behind his pads too. So like this is a the way that it was used for me in high school, and I'm sure you've heard this term. We've all heard it at some point. Um, I think the biggest thing about him is he's a foxhole guy. Like that's the mentality that you're getting with him. And if somebody's listening to this and they haven't heard that term before, a foxhole guy, you're in war. Do you want somebody that's going to stand in there and fight with you, or if you turn around and they're gone? A foxhole guy is going to be the guy that's there, ready to fight, ready to bring everything to the table, and that's what you're getting him at here. So he is he's a leader, man, and he plays and attacks the defense just unlike anything Oklahoma saw this year. Really, really excited to see what he can do in Arbuckle's scheme.
I like what you said about keeping his eyes down the field because one of the things that has stood out to me watching his film is, like you said, I don't know if his arm, which this is okay. I don't know if he has the arm talent of someone quite like Baker Mayfield, right?
Yep.
Or Kyler Murray, which that's okay because those two are literally in the top 10 best quarterbacks in college football history. So that's okay.
Right.
But his best throws and some of the most explosive throws he's had is when he takes the snap, 3-step drop, throw.
Yep.
And it's decisive and it's quick. And what I really like about some of those plays is that it's pre-snap identifying a matchup. Oh,
Correct.
I
Yes.
there's
Yep.
something there. And some of those
Yes.
throws, he's throwing when the dude's not even really open yet, when his
Right.
receiver's not open,
Yep.
but he's throwing it, trusting that matchup. And I think sometimes when you watched OU this past year, which yes, they're all of their wide receivers and their wide receivers' families were injured this year, but they're like everything seemed accidental almost when they even did look down the field or when they
Hmm.
completed something down the field. It almost seemed accidental.
Yeah.
When John Mateer looks at like it is very purposeful. It is quick, decisive, and it kind of negates any limitations he might have with arm talent. He negates that a lot of the time with decisiveness and trusting his dudes down the field.
Yeah.
And
Well,
that's a big thing.
there's another thing, and this will be kind of a this is a little bit of a sneak peek into one of the plays that I'm covering in the video. But there's a play against Texas Tech early in the season. The setting is 2nd and 12, and he at the snap they've got 3-man pressure. They drop 8. Texas Tech does, and he has a crossing route that develops late, and Texas Tech's defender that drops into the hook curl at 7 yards. He's rolling out and manipulating the pocket and steps up. And as he steps up, he looks like he wants to run, but you can tell he's trying to throw the football in this situation. He's a little more hesitant than somebody that's going to just take off. So he runs up towards the line of scrimmage, and it was at that point that you realize he understands that the defender in the hook curl right there at 7 yards is going to be in the way for that crossing pattern that's coming across the field. And so he draws that guy up and then sidearms the ball around him. It ends up being an incomplete pass, but it was a catchable ball. It was a perfect example of him manipulating the defense. But the thing that it showed is he understood what he was seeing and how he could manipulate it as a quarterback to make it work in his favor. So that is, again, keeping your eyes downfield and understanding and diagnosing what you're seeing quickly and being able to make decisions on the fly. Yeah, that's half the job. And for a guy that was 2 games into his career at that point, to be in his collegiate career, 2 starts into his career, to be able to see that kind of stuff and understand that it's impressive. And it's not hard to guess why a guy like Arbuckle would want somebody like that to continue running his system, because he understands it, he gets it, but he understands defenses, which is in itself, that's an entirely different conversation.
Well, in a play like what you just described works because if you're a defense, you have to respect his ability to
Correct.
throw down the field and his
Yep.
rushing ability. I was
Yep.
digging through the numbers. 46 scrambles this year. This is according to Pro Football Focus, which we know that data can be a little wonky at times. But he's credited with 46 scrambles this year. On those scrambles, he's averaging 9 yards a carry. He picked up 22 first downs on those 46 scrambles. So he can and when you watch some of there's plays where it looks like it's a surefire sack. It looks like he's going down and all of a sudden he's out of it. And I do like he pass fakes a lot on some of those scrambles. It
Yes.
freezes defense. You can see that. But
Yep.
if you're a defense, he's not a guy that's always looking to run first. Like he wants to throw the football.
Yes.
But if you're a defense, it puts you in a bind because you don't know what he's going to do. And he is not only genuinely dangerous as a runner, but he's not afraid of contact. So it's
Right.
just, and when you talk to people around Arbuckle, like Mateer plays the game that the way not only Arbuckle played it in high school, but the way he wants his quarterbacks to play. There is a clear symmetry. There's a clear through line to Mateer being the manifesting the philosophy of how Arbuckle wants to play.
Right.
And you mentioned it earlier. This not only in terms of Arbuckle sealing his potential, but in one fell swoop, you get a guy who can potentially revitalize your offense, and he just adds depth. I mean, before his commitment, you've got 2 quarterbacks going into next year, Michael Hawkins and Jetnu.
Yep.
Now, like they needed to add another quarterback, but they're not just adding another quarterback. They're adding your likely starting quarterback who was the number 1 guy in the portal, who you can now bring in to further the identity with your new offensive coordinator, Ben Arbuckle. It's a seismic move. It's a humongous move.
Yeah. And something that you were kind of alluding to, just to take it to that next level, is coaches and players only have a certain amount of time in the off season that they're allotted to spend time around each other. Players can spend as much time as they want together, and Mateer understands this thing as well as Arbuckle does. So, there's going to be nuances and new things that a lot of these guys on the offensive side of the ball are going to be needing to learn and pick up. And you've got an extension of the offensive coordinator there in Mateer. So there's so many different ways to look at this that bring value to Oklahoma, and it was quite frankly something they had to have. Oklahoma had to have this given the pressure going into 2025, and they got it done.
Yep. OU's lost. I mean, before Mateer's commitment, I mean, they had gotten a couple of guys that we'll talk about before Mateer committed, but the vibes were not good over the last couple weeks. They have not been good. Fans have been restless and anxious, and understandably so when you lose real guys in the portal, and you're not adding guys to counteract that.
Right.
And the hard part is, I think we've known for a while that the strategy heading into the offseason was to get John Mateer. And so if you do that, all of a sudden everything starts falling into place a little bit more clearly, right?
Mhm.
But if you don't get him, now all of a sudden things feel horrific, even
Yeah.
more horrific coming off of a 6-6 season. And here's the other thing. You mentioned the urgency, and that's where I think there's understandable excitement about John Mateer. And when you dive into the numbers, when you watch the film, it's obvious why that's there. It's obvious why you and I are both excited about him, why a lot of fans would be excited about him. It feels not weird, but I mean, you've got a guy in Michael Hawkins in that room too, who I think we both
Mhm.
agree is a highly talented guy with a ton of potential.
Yes.
And is there a world where you don't get Mateer, you don't get anybody else to really compete with Hawkins, and Hawkins is your guy heading into next year and everything's fine? Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. But you might be able to take more of that risk if you go 9-3, if you go 8-4, and there's not pressure on this staff and Brent Venables to turn it around. You you had to go get a guy that not only has the potential that Mateer does, but you can't any risks that you can minimize, you have to do that. If you're the staff, you have to do that. And so that's like, it puts it in a weird spot because it's not like, I don't think any of us want to overlook Michael Hawkins or pretend there's not potential there, right? But yeah, but Mateer just, you know what you have now. And now you've, like you said, you've got an entire spring and off season with Arbuckle and Mateer as the guys leading your. It's just, it takes down some of that unknown. And if you're Oklahoma, you've got to have as few unknowns as possible, because if next year doesn't go well, you're likely losing Brent Venables, this staff, and you're likely starting all the way over. I mean,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
the reality.
Yeah. It is absolutely, as I said, I mean, you had to have this. And the thing is, I don't want to overshadow what Michael Hawkins could be for the program. I believe his ceiling is immense. I think that his future with Oklahoma is incredibly bright. We saw flashes of what he was able to do just as a true freshman before he actually truly honestly understood what he was being asked to do.
Mhm.
Um, there is a lot of things to be excited about. I think really what this does though is it gives the fan base something to be excited about whenever Michigan rolls into town in week 2. Whenever the Palace needs to be loud and proud and something to really get excited about after a 6-6 season like this. This is honestly like a. It sounds weird, but this is how the transfer portal kind of works now. You can reset your roster. You can hit the reset button and go into the next season looking totally different on one side of the ball, and that's pretty much what Oklahoma's done. And Mateer is kind of like the manifestation of that. So it's huge. And the other thing that it does is I think it's going to help Oklahoma in terms of having not just new guys come into the fold, but guys who are maybe on the fence about what they're going to do after the bowl game. Like this gives you something as a player if you're thinking about maybe hitting the portal or not. Like this gives you something to be really excited about and something you want to maybe see through.
Well, and that's the other side of it too, is not only you mentioned how it can help in that regard, or recruiting guys in the portal, because now you've got an identity. You've got your
Mm-hmm.
offensive coordinator and your quarterback, and now recruits know what they're walking into. There's not an unknown there. You know what you're walking into. The other thing of it is Mateer has 2 years of eligibility.
Right.
So this isn't a 1-year rental, which to me, I honestly think Brian is maybe the biggest part of this to me is Yeah, look, maybe everything goes amazing next year. I know you wins a bunch of games and Mateer soars up draft board. Yeah, I don't know, right? But from
Mm,
a building the program aspect or built like you might have this guy for 2 years.
right.
And if everything goes well next year and you can build on top of that the year after, now that's more stability. That's giving yourself more of an identity. That's less pressure in terms of having to rebuild your offense. If next year goes right, you have a good chance to build on top of it the year after that too.
Mhm.
And that is helpful for guys in next year's portal. That's helpful for guys in next year's high school recruiting class. Now all of a sudden things feel a little bit more stable. And we talked about it, Brian. I think to me that the through line or the juggling act that the staff was going to have to do was there's obviously this immense pressure to be better right now after your second 6-win season in 3 years. And if you get a guy that only has 1 year of eligibility, but he wants to come and you feel confident he can contribute, you got to get him, right? But you have to find some sort of stability, something that you can build on. You can't just nab a bunch of 1 year guys, right? John Mateer, he's got 2 years of eligibility. All of a sudden, you have an idea of what your offense could look like for the next 2 years. It's huge. It's
Mhm.
humongous.
Yep.
Um, any final words on Mateer and just what this means for the program?
Uh, no, I mean it is again. I think one of the biggest. There were plenty of reasons for the offensive issues. I mean, everybody I think played their part in that, but this is a guy that he kind of comes in and understands exactly what's going to be asked of him already, and you don't have to wonder about the guy with the green sticker on the back of his helmet on the offensive side of the ball. Is he going to know what to do and what not to do? Yeah, I mean he is fully aware of what's going to be going on, what's being asked of him, and that's so huge. It's just it's a big deal for Oklahoma's offense.
Can I say, as an aside, that this is an Oklahoma football podcast, and there's a lot of reason to be excited about Mateer and Arbuckle in this direction of where the offense is going. But it's hard not to feel a little bad for Washington State
Yeah.
because in the span of a couple of weeks, you went from a pretty fun season where you go 8-4, you've got a young offensive coordinator, you've got a quarterback you can build around, to you're out your offensive coordinator, your starting quarterback, your quarterback's coach, who all three are now at Oklahoma, and then you get news a couple of days ago that your head coach is leaving to go to Wake Forest,
Yeah.
and now you've got over 20 guys in the portal. There's unbelievable pros in this portal era. If you're Oklahoma, you can come off of one of your worst seasons in a long time and feel some optimism because of the portal. But this is the downside of that portal, man. This is just as an aside. Just as a college football fan, it's hard not
Hmm.
to feel a little bad for
Yeah.
what's happened to them.
Yeah.
Unavoidable. This is the reality of the business, but
It is. It is. And it's what it does for me. I think what really sucks about it is at the administration level at a school like Washington State, like what's the motivation for a school like Washington State, Oregon State, um, San Jose State? What's the motivation to be good now at this point? Like, what's the motivation to go out there and hire the hot name, the young coach that's up and coming? Because if you have success, you're you're essentially you're pushing the restart button before you even know whether or not it's going to be a good thing. So like it just it really it hurts. It really does hurt to sit back and watch because you know a couple of weeks ago Washington State fans just beside themselves, just as happy as can be, and for plenty of reason. And now the program's in complete shambles. It's kind of like I said to you before we started this recording. They are left in the exact same situation that Oklahoma was left in 2021. Problem is, Washington State and Oklahoma are not one and the same when it comes to program, um, the support for the football program, obviously the tradition, uh, and just how big of a name Oklahoma is. Eventually, it was going to figure some things out and get back to being uh, at least relevant in the national scheme. And this is, I don't know what's going to happen with Washington State, but I would imagine it's going to be really difficult for them to go out and find a guy that can replace Dickert one for one, um, and all the other pieces that would need to come together for them to replicate the success they had this season.
I agree with you. But if you're Oklahoma, you have your own portal losses, right? I mean, you've had
Oh
over
yeah,
20 guys hit the portal. It's
yep,
just, you're not going to feel sorry.
yep.
It's
It's the
just,
nature of it.
it's the net. You got to do what's best for you. And this is, I mean, they had to get Mateer and they had to get an offensive coordinator they believed in, and they did that. So it's just, it's the college football world we live in now, Brian. It's
Yep.
the college football world. We need to talk about some of these other portal additions, but before we do that, Brian, I want to give a shout out to our sponsor for today. That is Prize Picks. What is Prize Picks? It's the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least two players for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your cash. Run your game all season long on Prize Picks, America's #1 daily fantasy sports app. Download the app today. Use code OK Oklahoma Drill. Or sorry, excuse me. Use code OU Insider to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That is code OU Insider to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Make sure to download the app today. Brian, so we've got other portal additions. It's not just Mateer. And I think a couple of these signings have come sort of in conjunction with the Mateer signing, which we kind of knew that was going to happen with, if you get Mateer in tow, maybe other things start. And I think by the time this publishes, there'll be probably at least a couple of guys in tow. Brian, I'm going to give you a couple of these names in terms of guys that OU has had. You've got Giovanni Gibson. You've got Derek Simmons, who committed just before we actually started recording today. You've got Keontez Lewis. You've got Luke Baklinko. I believe I'm saying that right. You got Jacob Ulrich. Those are your other additions as of right now. Out of those two receivers, let's talk about the receivers first. Out of Lewis and Gibson, who do you want to start with first? What stands out the most to you about one of those guys?
Giovanni Gibson is where I'd like to start. Haven't had a lot of time to sit and watch those guys, but from what I have watched, Gibson's an exciting prospect. He has what's the word I'm looking for? He has the traits that should translate pretty well at the next level, which would be going from FCS obviously to FBS and in the SEC at that rate. I think a lot of times people get caught up in where a guy's from, where he played, and sure there are positions that it's important to have, experience at a high level against high level competition. But Giovanni Gibson, the production that he had and the speed that he has at 6'3" and 205 pounds, he is built out well already. Comes in as one of the more impressive looking wide receivers in the room already, and he just came off a 1,200 yard season. It's it's something that you should be excited about if you're an Oklahoma fan, because this is this is a kind of one. This is kind of what you had, in my opinion. I think he's a really good replacement for what you lose in Nick Anderson. I
Mhm.
don't know exactly what it's going to look like one for one, but the tape shows that he is able to move fluidly at his size, and he has good speed. Uh, and even whenever he was playing against teams like Arkansas, uh, you could tell that he was able to create separation and has strong hands. It's a guy that you should be excited about. I cannot wait to see what he looks like uh, in Crimson, because if he translates well as I think he's going to, uh, John Mateer is going to be very happy to have that guy at his disposal.
That last part is the important part for me. Is he is built to succeed in this offense with Mateer and Arbuckle. He just
Yeah.
is. I mean, with the size at 6'3", he's long and he's certainly athletic. But I think the thing that stands out to me, Brian, is his speed. He's a little faster than I would have expected him to be. Just for a guy that size, you never know if it's gonna. How much is the athleticism going to show with a lanky guy like that, or is it going to be all limbs?
Right.
You know,
Yes.
and and also with how explosive and how aggressive this, Arbuckle and Mateer want to be in the passing game. I mean, you look at any passing stats, plays of 20 yards or more, A dot or average depth of target.
Hmm.
Mateer wants guys that can not only create separation but can make plays down the field. He can do that. I mean, he just can. And yeah, the question with a lot of these guys, it's going to be the same question with Mateer: is can that production translate to the SEC? I don't know, but I don't see any reason to be super concerned about that. I think he's an excellent fit. What stands out to you about Keontez Lewis?
The speed. That's the thing that jumps uh off the tape at me with me. I posted last night um on Twitter the one of the games. I just, because I cover the Big 12 on the side and do some stuff with that league. I remember BYU playing Southern Illinois earlier in the year, and so uh, it's a little more difficult to find tape on those guys with FCS programs. It's not really super easy to find that stuff on YouTube sometimes. But I found uh, a clip, one of his longer receptions on the year. It was a 53 yarder against BYU, and he just he doesn't blow past the corner, but he has excellent release. Does a good job separating, breaks contain, and makes a really good adjustment on the ball. Contested catch, comes down with it, and like that is a guy, to me, that's a guy that kind of again replaces something that you lost in the portal in Jalil Farouk, and that is, it's not, you can only look at what you have on tape, right? Like you can look at the measurables, you can look at what you've seen from them, and hope that it translates. And I obviously, like, that's where you leave the evaluations up to the coaches, and that's what they're paid to do. And if that's the case, if you're replacing what you lost, I think you got to be happy with it, because this is a guy that brings in a lot of experience, and you've got guys underneath him that will learn from the experience that he's bringing from somewhere else. And it's always good, in my opinion, it's always good to have new blood in the room. Like,
Mhm.
if you have the ability to add somebody with outside experience, especially in a room that really struggled uh, to stay healthy and all of that this year, it's a big get. And I don't care that he played for SIU. It doesn't, to me, he has the measurables, he has the experience, and he has the production, and it's something you should be excited about.
Important to mention there too. I mean, he spent this past year with Southern Illinois, but before that, Wisconsin. Before that, He actually went to UCLA to start his career.
Mhm.
I think the one downside with him is he's just got the 1 year of eligibility remaining. I think that, you'd like guys that you can build around, but you can kind of make up for that with the fact that Giovanni Gibson has 2 years of eligibility. And you mentioned it there with Lewis. He's built pretty similarly to Jalil Farouk, and he plays a lot like him too. I mean, I think he's lined up as the X or the Z receiver over 80% of the time, but he can line up in the slot from time to time because that's the thing. I mean, he's 6'2", 190. So he does have that speed, but he's not, he's not 5'10", 5'11", like your typical slot receivers, but he's also not 6'4", 6'5", like
Right.
Giovanni Gibson or Jaden Gibson, Nick Anderson. So he can kind of be that in between guy. And I do think that they'll get creative with how they use him. And Brian, all of a sudden, look, there's no way you can't look at everything that's happened up to this point and say, oh, it's amazing, especially in that receiver room. I mean, you're still losing Nick Anderson, you're still losing Angel Anthony, other guys, Brennan Thompson and JJ Hester, Jalil Farouk. But especially, and I think they'll add at least another guy at receiver. I'd be shocked if they don't. I think, Sategna from Arkansas is a guy I would expect to commit pretty soon. But now all of a sudden you look at that room, Brian, and you've got Deion Burks coming back, which I don't know if we talked about that last week or if that had even been announced when we talked last week. You've got Deion Burks coming back. You've got Jaden Gibson coming back. Now you add Giovanni Gibson and you add Lewis to the room. Now, if you get another portal guy and you can and one of these younger receivers that either these second year guys or even one of the freshman guys to pop, all of a sudden I think you can feel pretty solid about that room, especially with John Mateer at quarterback. I don't know if the ceiling is gonna be as high as we thought the receiver room could have been heading into this past season, but I think you can feel pretty solid about that room overall.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest things that's kind of getting overlooked is just how big a deal it is that Deion Burks is back, that Jaden Gibson is coming back. Like, if you remember, obviously you remember Jaden Gibson's, that's your dude.
I'm such a big Jaden Gibson guy.
In the offseason, like coming out of summer, he was kind of the guy that everybody was talking about in that room.
One of my preseason, I need to go back. I'll do this after the bowl game, but I want to say I predicted him to finish first or second on the team in yards.
You did.
I want to say I did.
Yes, you did. You predicted him to finish first, and there was every reason to believe that was going to happen because he was on track to be wide receiver one, and that is a huge piece to bring back. Having Deion Burks back is going to be huge. Those are guys that you really, and to be completely honest, this offense, this program has not seen what either one of those guys have to offer at full go. Even whenever Jaden Gibson started to come into his own at the end of 23, he was still somewhat limited in his snaps. I remember being confused, us having the conversation about why it was taking so long to get him involved the way that he was in the bowl game. And so having him be an integral part of things is huge. And yeah, it stinks to lose the other guys that you did, but I think if you were going to pick two guys out of that group of receivers to come back, I think the ones that you would want from a ceiling perspective are back. Even though you lose a guy like Nick Anderson, which hurts, I think Jaden Gibson and Deion Burks, just as far as what they provide, that's a good room. It's a good room that I think is going to have an opportunity to surprise a lot of people if they can stay healthy. You're muted.
Oh my God. That one time per podcast. It's a guarantee. This time it took me 45 minutes, but it's going to happen every time. Let's talk about these. Let's talk about these offensive line commits real quick. And I know you're the offensive line guy, so I wanted to hear your take. I know what stands out to me about these guys, but you've got Derek Simmons out of Western Carolina, who actually committed earlier today. Again, we're recording this on Thursday afternoon. You got Derek Simmons, then you got Luke Baklinko out of Stanford. So, and also the OU added Jacob Ulrich out of Kennesaw State as a punter. He's probably going to be your starting punter next year. But, for the interest of time, these two offensive linemen for you as the O-line guy, what stands out to you? I mean, I've looked in the numbers for both of these guys, but what stands out to you about them?
Well, both of them have experience playing both sides. They've both played left and right tackle. Simmons has played a little bit of guard too. I'll say this: I think as far as the 2025 season goes, I think you're a lot more likely to see Simmons than you are Baklenko play a major role. I think Baklenko is a guy that's going to need. He's going to need a little bit more time to develop under Bedenbaugh, but I think that's a guy that could end up uh, being more than serviceable at some point. I wouldn't necessarily call him a day one contributor for Oklahoma next year. I think what we saw from the young guys in Oklahoma Circle already towards the end of the year was something that he's going to have to catch up to from that perspective. Now, as far as Simmons goes, I do think that's a guy that probably steps in and is able to help you out right away. And that's a good thing. He's got 1 year of eligibility. Really, for that room, I think Simmons is like your perfect addition. I say that because he is a 1 year rental as far as the eligibility goes. He has experience. He's got good measurables, but he's not going to jeopardize the way that you're able to develop the younger guys underneath him. Those other guys are still going to have their opportunities. They're still going to, go into 2026 with an opportunity to play larger roles. He's the perfect stopgap kind of player to bring in. And I want to make sure and say this about him, but also some of the other guys that are coming in as well. You might see Western Carolina, you might see Arkansas Pine Bluff, you might see SIU, and just brush those players off. Simmons is a guy that he had quite a few offers, opportunities, places that wanted him. Kentucky is not happy that he didn't end up picking the Wildcats. They thought they had a good opportunity with him. He's a really good get for Oklahoma, and I think with what the Sooners have going into the bowl game, with all the practices that they're getting to put together, I think that the offensive line has an opportunity to look as good as it has all season long in this bowl game coming up. And I think Simmons is just not just another guy, but somebody that can elevate one of those tackle spots as the younger guys develop and become more and more confident in what they're doing.
I like your point about the schools that some of these guys are coming from. Brian, we talked about this before. Everybody always has to understand that paths to Power Four rosters are never that simple. They've never been that simple. There's so many factors that go into a kid's recruitment and where they end up. That's one. Two, you're going to see this more often also as college football moves more towards these scholarship limits and also towards a salary cap. Because now there's going to be even less spots for a lot of these guys to get Power Four spots, at least directly coming out of high school. Not to mention once there's not just unlimited money being thrown around, once there's actually some constraints on how much programs can spend on their roster, that's also going to have an impact on how many guys end up at Power Four spots. Two, it's always going to be dependent on the coaching staff you have in place and what players are good fits for what that program is doing. Look
Right.
no further than Bauer Sharp, who was maybe the most hated man on this team last year or this past season. And reasonable, I get it. Some of those lowlights, some of those bad plays are really bad. Where'd he end up? LSU. And you know what? He's probably going to play pretty well there.
Yep.
I mean, he probably is.
Yep.
I think there's no doubt there's potential in what he can do. I think Oklahoma just needed more from him than what he can do.
Yeah,
right?
he's
Like,
not a gadget, not a gadget play guy. Just throw him the ball in space.
yeah.
Let's not, don't get me on.
Yeah, well,
on
that's
that.
but like the whole
Yeah.
thing is like you're just players take unconventional paths all the time,
Yes.
and
Yep.
then you throw on top of it that like I fully expect Bauer Sharp to have a lot more success at LSU than he did at Oklahoma for a variety of different reasons. That's the thing with some of these guys too. And Brian, I agree with you about Baklenko. You gotta love the measurables. 6'6".
Yep.
The size is clearly there. He's over 300 pounds. He's got 2 years of eligibility, I believe. 3. He's got
no,
3 years.
No.
He's got 2.
I think 2. You might be right.
He's got no. This was his second season. This past
Okay.
year was his second season.
Okay.
So I think you like that you can build around him. I agree with you. I think out of the two, I think Simmons will land one of those starting spots. I do. Now I am curious because he played a little over 60% of the time at left tackle this past year. Played a little over 30% of the time at right tackle. Got some time at right guard. I'm curious, Brian, because for one, you did see some progress with Heath Ozaida and Logan Howland on the left side of the line.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, there were some lowlights too, but I think there's some things you can feel confident that are building blocks potentially. Yes. But then you've also still got, Jacob Sexton, who obviously got hurt, and but I think when he's healthy, he's probably a starter. He's played both sides of the line, although I think he's best at left. You've got Jake Taylor, who, when he's healthy, he's usually a starter. He started a lot at that right tackle spot. I am kind of curious when the dust settles, and this isn't even mentioning, Fasusi and EPL and Autry Dent and some of these other younger guys. I do think we're going to have some questions about, because I think OU will land at least another offensive lineman or two, but I'm a little curious about, I think you could throw out 5 different potential starting combinations this spring in terms of projecting ahead. I don't know. It's going to be interesting.
Yeah.
It's going to be interesting.
It is. And, I think the addition of Simmons and then that, like you said, Sexton and Taylor, Simmons and Sexton give you a swing tackle that can play both ways. So however it looks, I think you have an opportunity to have some guys that give you legitimate depth and put you in a good spot should something happen. At least a better spot than you had coming into this year, given the just overall depth and youth of the group. So it's it's good additions, and the group definitely looks better going into this offseason than it did last offseason after you lost all the pieces that you did.
Brian, kind of as a last topic. So OU's got 5 guys they've added in the portal so far, as of the time of recording. Brent Venables said a few days ago he thinks they're going to add 8 to 12 guys in the portal, give or take. So you've got 2 wide receivers, 2 offensive linemen, and a punter. So if you're working with roughly 3 to 7 additional roster spots for these portal guys, what are you looking for in terms of positions of need or any specific guys or anything that you're looking for this program to add over the next couple of weeks?
You need to add a kicker.
Yep.
Lucas Canero from Western Kentucky was the most recent guy that had been talked about. So he was a Lou Garza semifinalist. So a kicker is somebody you're probably gonna need to look at. I would be really surprised if they didn't pick up at least one corner. I think they are going to try and go get a corner. Um, as you said, probably another wide receiver on the way, probably another offensive lineman on the way. I think you would be safe to bet they're going to add somebody at both of those spots, which leaves the two that are kind of toss ups. I thought tight end was going to be more of a priority than it
I did
has been
too.
to this point.
Yeah.
Um, that that is a big question for me because that makes me wonder do they just feel like Devon Mitchell has really come a long way since the end of the season? Um, are they expecting somebody else to enter? Are they just waiting to see what happens? Are they looking for a bargain there? Like I literally have no idea what they're doing with that position, but you have to get a tight end of some sort. Um, Granted that I mean you just lost Sharp and Roberts, so you gotta pick somebody up there, and then I do think that there's a spot for a defensive end. I think you've
I
got
agree.
to find a guy that um, is able to really. You're hoping you get R. Mason Thomas back. If you do, you're hoping for a guy that can really be the other bookend and give you a duo of guys that can get after the quarterback. And then if if you have one spot left, this would be 7. This would be your pushing 12 here. But I think you got to find somebody that can fill the role that you had with DeJoun Terry. I think you got to find a guy that can rotate in there and help be a stopgap, somebody that can help stop things up in the run game and help them just continue to be dominant at that point of attack. So uh, there's some guys spread out, but I think you're starting to see outside of tight end, really this roster has pretty good depth at most places now. You just have some spots that need to be supplemented with experience going into next year.
I agree with you. I think tight end, they gotta do something there. Something. Um I do wonder how much of that is any uncertainty or potential uncertainty with Joe John Finley, who is going
Mm-hmm.
to be around for the bowl game. But I mean, there's certainly, if you're thinking about who is certainly guaranteed to be on this staff heading into next year, he's probably at the bottom of that list in terms
Yeah,
of certainty.
yeah,
Um, I do wonder what they got to get a tight end. They got to get somebody that can play right away. They just do, unless you, and like you said, unless you feel that confident Devon Mitchell can step in. That's the other part of it too, though. Is I mean, we still have a couple of weeks left in this portal window, and one of the things we didn't talk about is, I mean, Dominic Williams said, I mean, his future's up in the air. He said as of now he's looking at playing in the bowl game, but he's still got to make a decision. R. Mason Thomas still has to make a decision. And if either of those guys leave, all of a sudden those are positions of need.
mm-hmm.
Like you mentioned, you're already losing DeJoun Terry. So if you lose DeJoun Terry and Dominic Williams from the interior, all of a sudden you have a pretty urgent need at defensive tackle.
Yeah,
So OU's not done yet. And while John Mateer is the fish you needed to land, he's the big bass. He's the big catfish. You still got other little trouts. You gotta. I should have workshopped that before I did it. Um, I did not plan on making an actual fishing metaphor.
just the way you said that
Bass.
just got me.
He's got a bass. He's the big Kahuna bass. Hey, it's been a while, but hey, I grew up fishing in Lake Tenkiller in the Illinois River back in the
Okay,
day. I never caught a
okay.
big bass,
That's
but
I'm still chasing a I'm still chasing a double digit, but we can
we
chat
can.
about bass fishing another time. I That is a favorite pastime of mine. So, anyways,
Well, Brian, I think that's gonna do it for us here, unless the folks want to listen to us talk for another hour about bass fishing.
I'm good, man.
That's gonna do it for us here on this episode of the Oklahoma Drill. Thank you to everybody as always for tuning in. If you haven't already, make sure to like and subscribe here at this OU Insider YouTube channel. That just helps support us and helps make sure that you guys don't miss a single bit of content that we've got releasing here. All kinds of stuff happening over the next few weeks. We still got the bowl game, which is a week and a day from now. If you're not a VIP member over at OUinsider.com, never a better time to sign up than it is right now. All kinds of content flowing, not only portal information, but hey, basketball, men's and women's basketball, absolutely killing it right now. We've got softball in less than 2 months. You're not going to want to miss anything. Never a better time to sign up than right now. But as always, thank you guys for tuning in. We will see you guys next week on another installment of the Oklahoma Drill. Take care.